This is Flight Training the Way I See It with Mike Schiffler. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the December 2025 episode podcast of Flight Training the Way I See It with your host, Mike Schiffler. We're going to talk about all things flight training, and we've got a okay-sized show for you today. So we're going to talk about the new Sport Pilot and Sport Pilot Instructor PTS changes that are coming. Then we're going to talk about two meetings that were rescheduled from the FAA for the Part 141 modernization. After that, I'm going to identify and talk about some errors we found in the Airplane Flying Handbook. I'm going to do a 2 or 3 part series on that so we don't do them all at once. We're going to look at the ground reference section for this first one. Then we're going to talk about how one simple image from 1965 could convey something pilots struggle to understand. It's VX versus VY, not the definitions, the theory. And then we'll have 3 pro tips for you. All right, let's start the show off by talking about the new Sport Pilot and Sport Pilot Instructor PTS changes that are coming. So FAA recently published proposed changes to the Sport Pilot Instructor PTS. The intent is to align the current PTS with the new Sport Pilot regulations, also called MOSAIC. As an example, they want to remove the term light sport aircraft because the term was eliminated when the regulations changed. Now, because all ACSs and PTSs are incorporated by reference in FAR 61.14, any changes have to go through the rulemaking process. This means the FAA has to publish proposed changes, create a public comment section, and collect these comments for 60 days typically. After that, the rulemaking process starts. Now, because proposed changes don't impose any additional costs or burdens on the public, there's no need to conduct an accounting review of the cost of implementing the rule. FAA says the cost impact to the agency is minimal. So with this in mind, these changes will go through the cycle pretty quickly. Maybe the first quarter of 2026 we'll see those documents. And I put a link in the PDF version of the newsletter and this podcast. But for those of you who are driving or can't quite find it, you can just Google this. Sport Pilot PTS changes, FAA Federal Register will get you there. And you can read the proposed changes in the Federal Register, and there's still time to comment on them. Okay, the next topic we're going to look at there are 2 new meetings that are scheduled for the Part 141 modernization. There were 2 141 modernization meetings during the government shutdown, and one was in October, and the other was November, and the FAA has rescheduled these meetings. The first will be January 6th through the 7th at the FAA regional headquarters in Fort Worth, Texas. The second was scheduled for February 5th, one day only, and it also will be at the same location. You can find more information on these meetings, which are public meetings, but you do have to register for them. Just Google FAA 141 modernization. Now, the purpose of the meetings is to get recommendations for changes to Part 141. The FAA intends to completely rewrite Part 141. There are currently 5 committees that address this. One is qualifications, renewal, curriculum, technology, quality management, safety. And there are subcommittees under the umbrella of these 5. I sit on the curriculum, testing, and technology subcommittees. And we already have a lot of recommendations we're packaging up to get ready to send. The plan is to complete the 2 remaining meetings and present those recommendations to the National Flight Training Alliance, NFTA, which is a private organization packaging all this for FAA. They will process these recommendations. Then they will format them into FAR type document looking thing and forward that to the FAA 141 team within the FAA. After their review and adjustments, it will go to rulemaking. Now, we won't get anything for quite a while. It's clear they want to fast track this effort, but 3 years would be about the minimum amount of time I think it would take to get it done after it goes to rulemaking. So remember, the Sport Pilot new rules, MOSAIC, took 10 years to come out of rulemaking. Now let's look at some errors we found in the Airplane Flying Handbook, and there are a lot of them. So the latest Airplane Flying Handbook, FAA-H-8083-3C, has several errors. In the next few months, I'll show you all that we found. In this article, this particular podcast, I'm going to focus on Chapter 7, Ground Reference Maneuvers. Now, in almost every ground reference image, the airplanes are shown with the longitudinal axis of the airplane on the ground track. For example, S turns across a road, the image there shows the airplane's ground track as a perfect semicircle. Longitudinal axis of the airplane is shown flying on the ground track. Now, this is impossible with wind because the airplane must be banked so to crab when it's not directly upwind or downwind. So looking at all the points where the airplane is crosswind, the airplane would be banked so as to point into the wind enough to keep the ground track the same all the way around the point. So if you're looking at the pylon, the only time it would be on your line of sight would be directly upwind or downwind, if there's a point on the ground you're looking at. If the airplane is crabbing by banking outside of the ground track, then the pylon will be behind your line of sight. And if the airplane is crabbing by banking inside of the ground track, the pylon will be ahead of your line of sight. Now, this error in the images repeats for almost all of them. There are a few exceptions where the crab is shown. In the airplane, on the top of the image in the turns about a point image, but only slightly. It only shows a very small amount of crab and shows very, very little at the bottom. This leads one to believe that the longitudinal axis of the airplane is always on the ground track, wind or not. So all of the other ground reference maneuvers have a similar error. The rectangular course image is correct. And also in 8-on pylons, the image is wrong. It shows a fixed distance or a constant radius when you're turning on the pylon. That's not possible if there's wind. You have to let the airplane drift, or the line of sight will change. Also, they show the roll-on point to the pylon way later than it is, and the point where you roll off way sooner than it is. In addition to that, they missed out the opportunity to show where you were farthest away from the pylon. That's when you're directly upwind, and where the steepest turn has to be made, and that's coming across the top of the pylon, the top of the figure 8 you're making. Because you're not correcting for drift, you have to make a steep turn there so that you don't get blown over the pylon. You keep it in sight. We'll have more to say about that later. Okay, the next topic is one simple image from 1965 conveys something pilots struggle to understand. Vx versus Vy, not the definitions, the theory. So now I don't have the image that I can give you on audio, of course. So video, you're going to see the image, of course. And if you have the PDF version of our newsletter, you'll see it. But if you want to see it, you can go Google. It's quite easily accessible. 1965 Flight Training Handbook. It's yellow and blue. And you'll find this image I'm talking about. So sometimes an image can convey complicated concepts very well, and sometimes the attempt fails. And that is especially true in some of the FAA handbooks of current, in particular, the Pilot's Handbook of Aeronautical Knowledge, and forces in a climb, forces in a descent, and to some extent, forces in a turn. The maximum rate of climb, Vy, we're going to talk about now, occurs when the curve achieves the highest point on the y-axis of the graph. I'll show it to you in just a second. That will occur at the speed shown on the x-axis. So if the airplane is flown at Vy with a headwind or tailwind, the rate of climb will not change. Let's take a look at that. So here's a graph. Now, for those of you who can't see it because you're driving or doing something where you can't look at video, it has an XY axis and it has a curve that starts at 50 knots on the x-axis and goes vertically pretty steep. And that axis is called the y-axis. It's climb in feet per minute. And then the curve maxes out at about 70, and then it starts going back down. So this represents the power out of the airplane, out of the propeller, this curve. And there are various points along the curve. So the point we look at would be the point where you get the maximum distance between level flight and the top of the curve. That would be the best rate of climb speed. That's where you're getting the maximum power out of the airplane. So that occurs about 70. If you look at the curve and look at where it starts at about 45, 50 knots, that's as slow as you can go, and you cannot climb there. You have nothing else to climb on. There's no power available at that point. The fastest you can go is about 130 in this case. That's where the curve comes back down and intersects the x-axis again. At that point, there's no more available power to climb. Okay, so we said that the airplane's flown at VY, even with a headwind or tailwind. The rate of climb will not change. The time to reach the altitude will not change. However, the airplane's position on the ground will change. So with a headwind climbing at 700 feet a minute, the airplane will be 700 feet higher than it was before 1 minute ago, and it'll be a shorter distance from the runway or wherever you started climbing from than an airplane flown with a tailwind. So still, that airplane with the tailwind will still be at 700 feet in 1 minute, but a different location over the ground. So that means the angle's changing. So now we'll talk about the best angle of climb. So the best rate of climb then will give you the highest altitude gain in a given amount of time. Now your position across the ground will change with the headwind or tailwind, but the time it takes to get to altitude in terms of time will not. It's a function of excess power out of the engine. Now the best angle of climb, this is the speed, if you use it, will give you the best altitude gain per unit of distance. So it's an angle. It's a function of the rate of climb and the speed. So on this graph that I have on the video podcast, at the location of the maximum rate of climb on the graph, you can see that the speed to get that is approximately 70. So let's assume the rate of climb would be 1,000 feet per minute. So let's assume the rate of climb would be 1,000 feet a minute at that speed. At the location of the X speed, the speed of the airplane would be approximately 50. So this is a line that's tangent to the origin of 0x and 0y, where it intersects the curve. And if you look at the rate of climb there, it's about 900 feet a minute. It's less than 1,000 feet a minute. But think about this, the ground speed is much slower. It's 20 miles an hour or 20 knots slower, resulting in a steeper angle. So in this example, in 1 mile, the airplane going 70 would achieve an altitude of 855 feet, going 1,000 feet a minute, because the airplane's going slightly faster than a mile a minute. For the airplane going 50, that plane would be 963 feet in 1 mile. So the airplane going 70 will be further across the ground, but not at a higher angle. And you can sort of visualize that. You could say, what if I got 1,000 feet a minute out of the airplane? That was my best rate of climb, and maybe it was 200 knots. So you can think, or 300 knots. You can think that the angle is going to be very small to get to 1,000 feet and go that distance that you would cover 300 knots in a minute would be many miles, 6 miles maybe, right? And so the angle between 0 and 1,000 feet, the line you'd get would be from the surface, if that's where you took off from, and it'd be 1,000 feet in 6 miles. So the angle very shallow. But if you took off in an ultralight that went 500 feet a minute, but only did 30 knots, well, it would take you 2 minutes to get a mile. In 2 minutes, you'd be at 500 feet, 1,000 feet, right? And the angle would be much steeper. And the angle would be much steeper. So this also means that the angle then changes with a headwind or tailwind because the ground speed changes. And the ground speed and rate of climb both determine the angle the airplane will climb at. Now we're going to look at CFI Pro Tips. Number one is maintaining your CFI passenger currency. As you know, every 90 days, you have to do 3 takeoffs and landings minimum in the same category class of aircraft and type of a type rating is required. At night, they have to be to full stops. That's 6157 is that regulation. And you can save by doing this. Normally, you would say, well, I'll go get current, so I'll rent the airplane and I'll go do my 3 takeoffs and landings or more, and then come back. But if you're fairly current as a flight instructor, you just need to be sure that you're current to carry passengers. On your next flight, ask your student if it would be okay for you to do 3 takeoffs and landings on this flight. Then at the time you take control of the airplane to do the 3 takeoffs and landings, record the hobs when you take over and record the ending hobs when you're done. That's the part of flight you'll pay for. So the student is not out of anything, but you save all the taxi, run up, hobs, all the hobs there for that. And especially important in a multi-engine airplane where it's more expensive. So the student would have to do the taxi and run up anyway. So you're just paying for the part in the middle where you're stopping the lesson, or maybe it's the end of the lesson, and then you're starting the hobs meter for you then. Number two, pro tip, is how do you obtain your CFI recency of experience end date? So now they don't print those on your certificate. There's no expiration dates on CFI certificates any longer, except for me or other people still have them until that day passes. So I can pick up my CFI certificate and see when it expires, when I would have to do something by. But what if you don't have one and you can't remember your recent experience end date? Well, fortunately, you can go to FAA.gov, go to Airman Registry. It's easiest to Google Airman Registry FAA, and then it'll take you directly to the page and allows you to enter your name and any other details that it has about you. And it will search the database and it will tell you the certificates that you hold, both pilot, flight instructor, ground instructor. And if you pull up the flight instructor certificate side of that, you'll see the recency of experience end date. The third pro tip is to learn tech in stages. Don't try to get it all at once. I know a lot of you listen to what I have to say about using technology, and maybe you want to be a mini me, just like me. It means you carry your headset, an Apple Pencil, and a Apple or an iPad to your work, and that's all you take. Maybe a charging brick, like a extra battery, but that's it. So, and I run everything from that. I project on the smart TVs. I can work via Zoom from my couch if I want to, or from any remote location. I have a very directional microphone that picks up mostly me and hardly anything else. And all this stuff, didn't come overnight, but people really want it overnight. So we teach a class called Mastery Class where we teach this stuff in 3 days, 2 or 3 days. And we do it as part of our CFI class as well. But assuming you can't do that, do this. The very, 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 very first thing to do is to get yourself an iPad. And the very second thing to do is don't open up and start playing with it. Open it up to the web browser or something like that, maybe on your laptop or whatever else you have, and take a 30-minute course on how to use the iPad. If not, you're going to end up stumbling a lot because then you're always asking for someone to fix a problem that is a continuous problem for you because you didn't take the time to really learn how it works and what to do, best practices. So we really want you to take a 30-minute iPad class. And the things you'd be looking for would be things like how to launch applications, how to screen mirror. So mirroring your iPad to a smart TV or something else. You'd want to know if you save something, if you download something, where does it go? And that depends. So if you're using Acrobat, for example, on your iPad, and you want to save something, you can save it to Acrobat folder, or you can save it to the Files folder. And you have to know where that's at. There's a separate app on the iPad called Files, and you can go find it. But if you don't know this, then you're constantly asking people to find something, fix something. So you need to take it in stages, one step at a time. Don't load ForeFlight on right away. Get used to using the iPad. Get used to connecting to the internet. Get used to screen mirroring. And then install your favorite app, whatever that is. Start playing with that, and then eventually get to ForeFlight and learn that. Watch ForeFlight videos, the basic one. There's one that shows you as a flight instructor how to set up ForeFlight for you and how to set up for your student, that kind of thing. But you're going to need the prerequisite stuff. And then just go as you go. So the next thing you might want to do is at some point learn how to use Zoom and use the iPad with Zoom. And that is not the easiest thing in the world in the beginning, but with a little bit of instruction, you'll get it and you'll have that. So get proficient as you go, and it'll go much more easily. And that's the end of this month's December 2025. This is December 29th for me, podcast of Flight Training the Way I See It. This has been a production of Flight Training the Way I See It. News, tips, and opinion.